So last night, Dark Side of the Ring aired the Double Life of Chris Kanyon episode, and yeah, when people say that this is going to be the darkest season of Dark Side of the Ring, they're not kidding because this was probably one of the darker episodes they've done. It basically went over, not just Kanyon's career, but the fact that on the outside of the ring, he was very unpredictable. Basically, the best way to put it is, and they even said it here, because he went later on in his career to a doctor or somebody, and they basically said he was bipolar. He had a bipolar disorder. And in case you're wondering what that is, it's basically something along the lines of, well, basically it's a disorder, it's a disease that's basically along the lines of, one day you're okay and then the next you're not. Or one moment you're fine and then the next you're not. Things like that. It's like you can burst into these moments of anger and frustration for no apparent reason. And then all of a sudden, a few moments later or the next day, you're fine. Like nothing happened. Like, somebody might ask you, why did you get mad at me? And you can be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, that's basically what, in a sense, bipolar is. Well, that's what he had, because the people they interviewed in this episode were, of course, Dallas Page, DDP. They interviewed the Young Bucks. They interviewed Luke Hawx. They interviewed James Mitchell. And another guy, I think his name was Andrew, who worked with Kanyon in WWE and now works in All Elite and now works behind the scenes in All Elite Wrestling. And yeah, it was just one of those episodes to where it's like when you watch it, you see how much talent Chris had, and basically how it was pretty much not utilized to the fullest extent that it should have been utilized in. I mean, they do talk about the breaks that he got, the big breaks he got, like when he became Mortis, and then he was able to break out on his own, first joining up with Raven, and then basically getting an opportunity in WWE when WWE bought out WCW, and it was basically one of those kind of stories that you look at the fact that he was so up, if you will, when it came to being an on-screen and in-ring talent, that behind the scenes it was, like I said, it was unpredictable. Like, you didn't know which side of Chris you were going to get. And they talk about the fact that he lived in a Catholic environment and that he confessed to the preacher that he was gay, and that the preacher basically told him that you gotta basically get away from being like that. You gotta kind of change, if you will, to be truly cleansed and all that. And Chris is like, well, this is who I am, according to what they were talking about. And yeah, it was just one of those stories that really just you get surprised by how far down emotionally he was getting behind the scenes. Like, sometimes when it feels like he could be on the up and up behind the scenes and everything, things were cool, things were fine, but then all of a sudden he would just go through these moments of downward spiralness, and it just to me, this is one of those episodes to where they did at the end end with the number to call, the website to look up if you know anybody that has these kind of problems, and to basically utilize to help them out. But yeah, it's just one of those episodes that's like, man, you knew about the guy in the ring, but you had no idea, about the guy behind the scenes, because like James Mitchell said, there were times that Chris would lash out on him and for no reason, and then he'd be okay with him. He'd do the same sometimes with other people who he knew. Like Luke Hawx and a few others, and it's like, basically what it had to deal with is he was gay. He was gay during a time when it was very taboo to be gay, and that if in wrestling up until the 90s, late 90s, or even early 2000s, if you came out as gay, even if you portrayed a gay character, you were basically labeled a bad guy. You were labeled a villain, and they gave prime examples of a lot of characters that were like that, like Adrian Street, of course Adrian Adonis, Gold Dust, if you will, Billy and Chuck when they were a tag team. They gave all these examples basically of how gayness was sometimes portrayed in wrestling, whether it's Mid-South or even WWE or NWA, WCW. It just, basically, Kanyon, wanting to get into the business, didn't want it to come out that he was like that he was gay, because he felt that could derail his career, that could derail any kind of opportunity he would have. So he wanted to keep it secret. And the only person that knew was James Mitchell. James Mitchell was the only one that he knew, or the only one that he told, I should say, at the time. And basically he tried to keep it as secret as possible. He tried to keep it kept secret as possible. And James would point out that mentally, and a lot of the people that they talked to, including, like I said, the Young Bucks and Paige and Luke Hawx and even Brian Cage, they all would acknowledge that even though he would try to keep the gayness a secret, and James mostly is the one they talked to a lot in this episode, even though he tried to keep the gayness a secret, it bothered him. Yeah, sorry about that, but like I said, they talked to a lot of people, and basically, the overall thing was, for a time, he tried to keep it a secret that he was gay. He tried to keep his gayness a secret from a lot of people, including those he trained. And even though eventually they accepted it when he told them, it was still a bit of a surprise. I mean, even Brian Cage at one point in the interview, he was like, oh, wait a minute, what? And again, sorry about that. Phone called again. So got another phone call there, just a brief one. But like I said, Brian Cage was like, he was a little like, as he explained in the interview, it was like he was kind of caught off by it, but then he kind of basically accepted it, like, this is who he is, and that's fine with me. And they showed footage from a show that actually somebody uploaded recently here on YouTube called World Wrestling Legends, The Reunion. And they showcased the aftermath of the match between Paige and Kanyon, and where Kanyon basically answered and addressed this, the question of, is he gay? Is he gay? And he admitted it. He said, I'm the first openly gay athlete right now in the sport. And Paige was cool with it. He said, hey, you're always going to be my brother. He hugged him, embraced him, and that was it. And, you might ask yourself, well, what do the Young Bucks and Brian Cage have to do with this? They got trained. They got trained by Kanyon. Kanyon had trained them and all that. And Brian Cage, actually, one of his first matches in the independents, well, not one of his first ones, but one of his first ones on a smaller independent showcase, if you will, in front of a small crowd. Like, let's say, when I used to go to the Central State Wrestling events, we had like an armory. This was about kind of like that, but a little smaller. So Kanyon took him on in a match, and Brian Cage's first initial thought was, Kanyon's got to go over. He's the bigger name. But Kanyon, the one thing everybody said about him was he was so giving. He was such a giving person, despite his bipolar disorder, despite his paranoias and his mental stability. He was such a giving person that Kanyon was like, no, I'm not going to go over. You are. And he let Brian Cage beat him. So that was really cool. And they showed the aftermath of that, of him appreciating, Cage, and basically acknowledged him as one of the future of the business. And like I said, they showed that he was friends with the Bucks. That during one of his moments of depression, he had called, I think it was Matt Jackson, I believe, on the phone. Matt was, from what he said, he was getting into the shower and he was getting ready to go into the shower, and clean up and everything when he got a phone call, and Kanyon was just upset. He was bawling. He was going to say he was going to end his life, stuff like that, and and that Matt needed to say a prayer for him, and he talked him down. Thank God, Matt at that time was able to talk him down and even pray for him. And I think in a sense this kind of tells you that Matt's a Christian. In a way himself. It's just his character doesn't come off that way on television, but you can kind of tell the Bucks are probably born again Christians. They just don't flaunt it or anything as much. But anyway, he prayed for him and all that, and things were okay for a while. They were fine, and then it got to the moment that you pretty much knew they were going to talk about, and that's his his passing. And they talked to James, and James Mitchell got emotional during some moments of this, including this moment where he was like, Kanyon was cool with, Kanyon got angry with him a bit, but then they were cool, and then Kanyon drove him to the airport, and they were just talking, and Kanyon started reminiscing about all these great moments and stuff, and James knew when Kanyon started to do that, like, one, it's great to hear him, being all happy and joviant and everything and remembering all these good times. But James kind of knew just by the fact that he was doing this, doing all this, being willing to drive him to the airport and reminisce at the same time of some of the good old days. He kind of knew. It's like he had this feeling in the pit of his stomach that Kanyon was going to do it. Kanyon was going to go through with it and pretty much end his life. That was it. He was gonna pretty much go through with it and end his life. And unfortunately, then probably a couple of days later or so, that's when he got the news that he was found dead in his apartment in New York. And again, James said basically he knew. He's like, just the way Kanyon was talking and all that, James knew. And when he got off the plane and his wife picked him up, his wife asked him what's wrong, how things were with Kanyon, like, what's wrong? And James was like, I think he's going to do it. And unfortunately he did. Now, one of the things they talked about in the special, in the episode was, when he came back to WWE, how WWE basically, and this was from Kanyon's own perspective, WWE basically was punishing him for being gay. Like, for example, he gets told that he's going to be put into a segment with two of the big names at the time on television for WWE, that being Undertaker and Paul Heyman. Of course, Paul Heyman associated with Brock Lesnar at that time. And that basically Kanyon is going to be utilized as a parody of Boy George. And what Kanyon and basically what Kanyon felt was being done here, and there was some that did agree with this, some that did agree, some didn't, that they interviewed. And I think the guy that worked behind the scenes with WWE, who works behind the scenes for AEW now, basically said that WWE would never do this, that they wouldn't be the kind to do this, while others agreed and some others didn't. But basically Kanyon's thing is, when he did that part, he was put in that box and he came out of the box, as Boy George, and singing the song, don't you ever want to hurt, or something like, don't you ever try to hurt me, kind of deal, something like that. And basically he got the living crap beat out of him by Taker, with a chair on the back, tossed into the announce table area, chair shot to the head. And the Bucks were in attendance that night for it, because they said that anytime WWE is town, they would go to the event. And they both felt that this was not just part of the storyline, that this was punishment. They were one of the few that agreed that Kanyon was onto something, that this him doing the Boy George thing was WWE's way of outing him as being gay. And even at that time, WWE was still very, I guess you could say, depending on your point of view, very negative towards LGBTQ people. Despite how they are today. I mean, today they don't care. Today, to save public image, WWE is like, oh, well, we're fine with LGBTQ people. But back then, they weren't. So basically, Kanyon and others that sided with him on this speculation, on this theory, was that as soon as he came out of that box, it was basically him coming out of the closet, and that was their way of punishing him for being gay, for doing that. And his career wasn't the same after that. I mean, yeah, he had a Cruiserweight Championship match against, I think, Ultimo Dragon at Vengeance. But then everything else was just not very well timed for him in the company. Despite, potential pushes he could have got here and there, opportunities he could have got here and there, it just wasn't a good time, and he was let go afterwards. And then, of course, he did Independence. He became a member of the Howard Stern Show. And it was during the Howard Stern Show that they showed interviews with John Cena and, Kanyon, going back and forth on the phone with Ric Flair. And basically, people say that the Plane Ride from Hell didn't paint Rick in a good light. This probably didn't help that either. And John Cena, I don't think John's going to be in trouble of anything, because he's basically one of the golden gooses still of WWE, despite him being more Hollywood now. So I don't think showing what he had to say on the Howard Stern Show on Dark Side of the Ring is going to hurt him. Because both of them just basically, in a way, buried Kanyon, said he wasn't that good in the ring. I mean, Rick basically said, hey, you're a good person and everything, but you're not that good in the ring. And some people would basically say that was their way of saying, they just didn't like the fact that he was gay. And maybe that might be a fact, maybe that's true, we don't know. But, yeah, it didn't. Again, if you think the Plane Ride from Hell painted Rick in a bad light, this didn't do him any favors either. It didn't. And if that's not enough, again, they talked about, the fact that he tried to continue on with his career. But there were many moments. James even said that he would go over and stay a couple of weeks, days, a month with Kanyon, because, maybe he was there, in the area on business, because TNA was in Florida, so he would probably stay with him. And he would notice at times Kanyon just, sitting on the floor, filing, doing some paperwork, just organizing different papers. And, Kanyon would come up with an excuse of, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, when it was something completely different. He would point out that Kanyon would go on these websites looking for guys as well, printing them out and then putting them into a lockbox. And basically, James stated that anytime people would come over and wonder what was in the lockbox and everything, Kanyon would be like, it's none of your business. And, James, basically told him, well, you know what? Sooner or later they're going to find out what's in that box. And basically you're turning that box that you're hiding all this, information of, looking up, potential male, love interest or male, companions, if you catch my drift. You're hiding it in potentially what James called Pandora's box. And it was just, again, it's just, overall, this episode is just one of those episodes that when you look at how good he was as a wrestler in the ring, as a sports entertainer, wrestler in the ring, it's hard to imagine that he had these problems behind the scenes. And, that it led to him eventually, basically, taking his own life with an overdose. So, yeah, it's one of those episodes that, again, really exemplifies how darker this season is for Dark Side of the Ring, if not more controversial this season is for Dark Side of the Ring than any other. And, it's a shame. It's a shame to see him, go at such a young age, when he did in 2010, because I think had he gotten help, and and I think I'm not alone in saying this. I think if he would have gotten help, just like anybody else in his position could, needs to get help. If he had gotten some help, that I think he'd still be around today. And I think honestly, AEW would. I know people think AEW is always glorified for, being something more than what they're not. But in this case, I think AEW would have been a great fit for Kanyon had he gotten the help that he did, and been able to continue in his his career, I think AEW, probably in his final years in the company, final years in the business, would have been a good fit for him had he been around today, and gotten the help he needed. But yeah, it's just one of those episodes to where you're like, yeah, this business, really takes a toll on you, not just physically but mentally, because you don't know, how they're going to accept somebody, whether or not they're straight or lesbian or gay or transgender. You don't know how they're going to accept them. Nowadays, it's commonplace. It's not a big deal. And companies like AEW, and more importantly WWE, and even Impact, they have to accept this, because if they don't, it's going to make them look bad, and they don't want to lose public image. They don't want to look, bad in the front, in the eyes of anybody. So, yeah, but yeah, it's one of those episodes to where, again, they have the prevention hotline and the help hotline for people, for anybody to call if you know of somebody in this kind of predicament. And yeah, it's just unfortunately, and it's unfortunate to see a talent like him be lost at such a young age. But yeah, if you want to watch this episode, I'd say watch it, but really take your time with it, because it is very, very, I'll put it this way, depressing at times, but very, very insightful when it comes to how mentally much of a toll this business can take on you, especially when you don't want people to know about this other side that you have to yourself, this other side of yourself that you have that may or may not be, accepted. So if you want to check it out, I'd say check it out, but really take it with caution. And next week, I'm going to say this, that one's going to be interesting too. It's going to be dark, but it's also going to be controversial, and it's going to be violent, because they're going to talk about Onita and Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, FMW. So, but anyway, though, guys, that's my overview, my review on Dark Side of the Ring's Double Life of Chris Kanyon episode. Look forward to the FMW one next week. Check out my Teespring store for merchandise. Also, check me out at BW Roses Discussions on all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. Also, check me out on Patreon at BW Roses and BW Roses on Vimeo. So until next time, guys, take care. God bless. I'm out.